So 80 years ago, you were young women at the time, remarkable women, and there will be insights for us all, I believe. So let us take that step back in time. Let's go back to 1944, and let's turn to you, Mari. So you were 17 years old, and you were in a bunker, a secret operative bunker, Portsmouth.
It was rather more than a bunker. It was a series of tunnels that had been dug deep into the cliffs overlooking Portsmouth Harbour. And I was a switchboard operator, and the switchboard contained 9 operators, so it was pretty large. And messages were mostly sent by senior officers. But about 3 weeks before D-Day, I was taken off the board and given basic training on something called a VHF set. This was just an ordinary set. It wasn't a radio, but because it had no dials. But what it had were levers. And it was a very simple, I think it must have been in its infancy. When I lifted my lever to relay the message, that was fine, but the recipient couldn't return his until I had finished and depressed the lever. And when he lifted his lever, I couldn't believe my ears, because what I heard was warfare. I could hear machine gun fire, cannon, bombs, men screaming, men barking out orders, the general chaos of war. But for a few seconds, I was so surprised because we had no idea who we were messaging or where they were. I suddenly realized that what I was listening to, what was in my head, my ears, was men who were storming the beaches of Normandy for the invasion that led to the liberation of Europe.
And so how long were you in this network of tunnels?
Well, the duty shifts, I think, were 24 hours.
Right.
But we weren't at our post for 24 hours.
But you were stationed there for how many months?
A good 6 to 9 months afterwards, and 3 months after the war ended, King George VI came down to the fort, and he toured the whole fort, all the rooms, all the communication, all the equipment, and at the end we all went up to the top of the fort, and may I just add that to get from where we were in the tunnels to the top of the fort took 350 steps.
And you remember that?
I remember that. I remember that very well.
Do you know, I'm so conscious you were 17.
Yes.
And we talked when we did speak about a 17-year-old now and what life had dealt you before then that might have prepared you to be more resilient than perhaps a person of that age now, because you had lived through the Blitz. You were a little girl in the Blitz.
I was 13 when war broke out.
Right.
My parents didn't want us to be evacuated with our schools because my sister and I were at different schools, different ages.
Yes.
And so we were in London, and there were no schools really open. And the few that were, I mean, the education was non-existent. So I have to say my formal education stopped at 13. And so I wasn't really very experienced at anything. However, I did become a GPO trained switchboard operator, and it was that got me into the WRENs. I volunteered to join the WRENs. I went in at 17. They took me because I was a GPO. They were looking for staff in preparation for D-Day. Mm-hmm. And they wanted anybody in communications.
And I got that sense from speaking to you at the time that there was an element of class fluidity at this time. So if a young woman got herself skilled, she could be rubbing shoulders, as you were saying.
Oh, yes.
On that operation, you were bunking with somebody from,
a titled,
as you would say, a titled lady.
Yes. The UK then, in 44, was very class conscious. And I was a working class kid. And I suddenly found myself meeting all sorts of people from different backgrounds. And, it was a bit of a revelation, because in those days, you didn't socialise with other people that weren't of your class.
Now, we could take a risk now and go to the story that we weren't sure whether we'd go there today.
Not today.
Not today.
No.
I'm sure the room would love to hear what the story is. But there was a deficiency. We will now. There was a deficiency of vitamin D.
Because we were working underground for so long.
Yes.
The authorities decided that we were in danger of being deprived of vitamin D.
Yes.
So they brought in about 4 or 5 enormous sun lamps.
Yes.
And we had to have compulsory sun ray treatment.
How many of you were there?
Oh, there must have been, in that circle, it was a large room.
Bit like this?
Yes, so 150, 100 women.
And you were
sitting in a large circle.
Yes.
All bared to the waist.
The other detail.
With sun goggles on. Well, it was so hilarious that most of us were sitting there with tears running down the goggles. However, it did the trick, and we did get some vitamin D.
Glad to hear it. Thank you so much, Mari. If I can turn to you, Mildred. We're still back in 1944. So you were, at the time, you were a part-time nurse. You trained in nursing?
Yes, that was my area, which you did when you were 17.
Right.
I did 12 hours a week, and I trained to be a theatre nurse. And then they check up on you, and I was asked if I would like to change and become a nurse or work in a factory, or would I like to do the Inter-Services Research Bureau.
That sounded very
And I
mystical.
thought that sounded very interesting.
Yeah.
And I said, yes, please.
So you went to London. You didn't know, you got called to London? You signed up for that?
That turned out to be an office in Baker Street, which was
Yes.
the headquarters of SOE.
Right. So you went to London for this assessment for 2 weeks?
Oh, no, we were assessed long before you started there.
Oh, right.
Oh, lots. We went through dozens of interviews and all sorts of funny questions. Did you get on with your mother? And how far can you cycle?
How far
I
can you
thought, what
cycle?
on earth this is going to be?
Yeah.
And then when you actually started, they watched your every move, and it was very, very, very secret.
So this was the Special Operations Executive.
Yes.
This was Churchill's baby.
Yes.
And of the 200 that were sent for the assessment, you were one of
There were 10 of us picked out.
10 picked.
Yes.
So you must have had something very special that they knew they needed. So what happened next?
I don't know what there was special. I don't think I had anything very special. I was rather a quiet person.
Right.
So that after that they decided instead of doing further training, they would send you straight into the field.
Right.
But
What did that involve? You just headed off on a plane?
Sorry.
Did you head off on a plane?
No,
What happened?
we didn't. Nothing so luxurious. They decided that we would go by ship, by troop ship, and we went to join the troop ship. We were given a couple of days' leave, and on the way in, there was a very heavy air raid, and so we were late reporting, and we were not good news when we got to the boat. And the hold-up, first of all, was that we were in first aid nursing infirmary. They did our initial training.
Or the families? Yeah.
Yes,
Mhm.
and so they said that to go overseas, in their rules, you had to be 17 and a half. The general forces, it was 21.
And you were
And I was only, I don't know, 18 or 19.
19, I
But,
think you were saying.
They stopped us going, and then they decided to post somebody who was 19 to join us. Therefore, the average age was 17 and a half, and off you go.
Oh.
But Lord Haw, I hope most people know about him, he was broadcasting, and he gave out all our names, all our training, everything about us, and the fact that he bombed my home the night before on the train. He knew about that air raid, and the Wartime-on-Thames was actually bombed that night. And so they held us up. Then they decided they'd send us anyway because they got so far we might be useful.
So where did you go?
They then landed in Italy.
Right. Did you know that you were going there before
No,
you were
we
up-
didn't know we were going there. We just went where we were sent.
And what was your role there?
Well, we were always considered to be what I was recruited in the first place as a clerk. So we were a clerk. Well, the signals had a separate unit, and they called us the posh lot. And we were the mixed bunch. There were some were operational, some were just working as, in my case, I was PA to a captain whose job was issuing special maps and special bombs and things to blow things up, all sorts of secret weapons. And although I did the paperwork, I was never allowed to see where they were or to see what they were.
Right.
Every mortal thing was keep your mouth shut.
Probably safest. And you talked about a carol concert in December 1944.
Yes, 'cause
It was very special.
The village we started was a scruffy little old fishing village, and there were no facilities for clubs or entertainment whatsoever. But we came to Christmas, and it was the worst winter they'd had for 200 or 300 years, and it was just like home. But the word went round it was Christmas, and we decided we would do something. So a group of girls, we cleared out a bomb building or something, cleared it all out, and the men got round and scrounged some chairs and planks to put across one chair to the other. Somebody found a hymn book with the carols in it, and we actually found a church organist and a harmonium that was hopelessly out of tune. Anyway, there was every nationality you could think of in this unit. And when it came to Christmas, they sang carols in their own language, and I found that was very moving.
I'm sure.
Because you looked around and wondered how many of those men would get back, and how many of them were really worshipping Christmas.
Sure.
They were all Christians, and they were fighting a war.
And it wasn't without threat either, was it? Because there were German deserters around.
Yes.
And as women, you were in one place, but without any means really of protecting yourself. So there was a request for a gun.
Well, we did get a raid on our unit, our village one night, and after that the cooks were British Army, and we had a guard on our door.
Right.
But if you went out alone, you had to have a male escort.
You asked for a gun, or your female officer asked for a gun to protect, but that didn't happen initially.
Commander, when we were in the first posting, he said a woman with a gun was more trouble than she was worth, so he wouldn't allow it.
How did that go down?
Not very well, not very well at all. I actually had an Italian girl sharing my room, and she was working with us, and she insisted she kept her revolver. But we felt a lot safer, I think, with the men at the door.
So these experiences, they're life-changing, they're fascinating to listen to, but would you say, the two of you, that war changed you, changed the trajectory of your life?
Yes.
Yeah, right. In what way?
I think it gave us a lot more courage that we would do what we wanted to do. And I think that feeling has gone on, and there is a little bit of improvement. There's room for a lot more. But I think they tend to say, well, all right, you want equality, so we give you the rough jobs as well, not only the top jobs. But I think women their lot has improved since the war.
And what about yourself, Mari?
Yes, I would say that the war liberated women. It was the beginning of women's liberation, because they realized they could do complex jobs. And so today you've got career women who are in charge of great organizations. The glass ceiling has been cracked, and it all started after the war, post-war. Took a little while to gain momentum, but it did.
And when you left, how much, was it 18 months afterwards, there was peace, and then did you go back to life? You married,
yes.
You had children.
Yes.
Did you work afterwards as well?
Yes, I did. I became a secretary and then married, had children, and my life has been fairly uneventful until the last 6 or 7 years, when the taxi charity has transformed it completely.
We should mention this. We do need to mention this. You spoke so beautifully when we did chat around, and you put it that way, that you've had some of the best years of your life. What sort of activities?
I've had such incredible experiences. For instance, the Normandy trips are moving. They're a revelation, because you see ordinary French people going up to the old guys, the veterans, just shaking their hands and saying, thank you. They're still doing it, and it's nearly 80 years.
Yes.
It's remarkable. I find the whole thing emotional, and almost a revelation that people's gratitude can extend for such a length of time.
Wonderful.
But for them it was their freedom. Their countries were regained. And they remember the lives that were lost.
Yes, and we're going to be hearing...
the new memorial now in Normandy is a most moving, for me it was,
really
most moving experience. Couldn't believe it.
And yourself, Mildred?
I think when we look back, the women were busy in the 1480 war, so we've been a long time getting anywhere, and I think we should keep going. I belong to things that we do go back to Italy, and we honour the people who helped us with the partisans, and they sheltered lots of people. And same thing in Belgium, there's a thing called the Comet Line, and they helped us escape from Europe. And all those people need to be remembered.
Yes.
And I think that's why this returning, some people might think, well, you're glorifying war. We're not glorifying it, we're just reminding people the horror of it.
Exactly.
And those who lived with occupation, I think, felt it even more than we did in England being bombed. The fact that they are actually there, every time you open your door, there's a German around or another somebody not on your side. It must be a horrible, horrible feeling.
Mm-hmm.
If I may just add, the French have something they call a duty of remembrance, which they teach in their schools, so that their children are also conscious. And this is 3 generations on, almost. But they continue to teach that we mustn't forget because we had been occupied. We wouldn't know that. We were never occupied. But those that were, they know what happened. And, they still remember and are grateful. And you can say no more than that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, both of you. I'm speechless. I know that everyone in this room will be grateful to you for sharing your memories. And this is the thing, before I do say goodbye to you, it's I'm so struck by your humility, the two of you, and thank you so much for sharing what you've said today. I'm delighted to have met you. I feel absolutely privileged, especially on International Women's Day. You're everything I would wish for myself and for everyone else in this room to learn from. Wonderful. I have a gift for each of you from a great friend of the taxi charity. I'm just going to give that to my colleague Scott. So these are from Johnny Gallagher, who's just over there. There he is. Handsome pants, Johnny. This is from Johnny for both of you. That's for you there, Mari. And this is for you, Mildred.
Isn't that beautiful?
Aren't they gorgeous?
They're
So
beautiful.
congratulations, and thank you very much for speaking to us.
For me, as a little girl, this was the sound of tanks was wonderful. They came on our road, and I went with my little flag outside waving, and so that was then in '45. But in '44, after the battle, there were many, many British soldiers and other Allied soldiers around where I live very close to Oosterbeek, Arnhem. This is Ede. There was also a DZ, and we lived. I still live in the same house where it all happened. And around us, there was, by example, a farmhouse. And there were 50 soldiers hidden for 5 weeks. They were dropped too far from the fighting area, and they were just sitting there. My father was a man that could speak English at the time, so as much as he could, he went there to talk to them. And he was a father for, they were young and they were bored. So those 50, and then we had a farmhouse next door with chicken sheds. There were also 8 hidden. So there were so many hidden, so something had to be done. My father was attached to the resistance. Our neighbor was the head of the resistance. And there was a famous Major Tatum Water, he was staying next door. And Tony Hibbert was staying 2 houses further. And well, they were not the only, but they organized this big escape. It was called
The
Pegasus 1.
Oh, the Great Escape.
The Pegasus 1.
Right,
yeah,
okay,
yes.
right. So that
there was later a Pegasus 2 that failed,
right.
But on this escape there were 139.
Right.
And it was all planned on a certain day, especially the day that the villages along the river had to be evacuated.
Right.
So there were many people on the road.
Yeah.
And the wonderful thing is, behind our house was the provincial electricity power station, and then they had a special telephone line with Nijmegen, so they could make the plans with the Allied soldiers in Nijmegen. It was all very well planned, and there were some intelligence people who went the right little paths through the woods, because the Rhine was the frontier.
And that was only 500 meters away.
And that was from where all these people were hidden.
I see.
It was much longer. So
Oh,
they
right.
needed horse carts.
I see.
They went many times on bicycles. They were not very well on bicycles, those English people. They had to train in those farmhouses. And then one guy, a Dutch guy, accompanied them to that was about 5 kilometers.
Right.
And they were hidden during a weekend in the woods, not far from the river.
Yeah.
And then this Dutch guy went back on the bicycle and one bicycle empty. That's possible.
Right.
To get the next one. So
Right.
that went a whole weekend. Even Red Cross nurses were all involved. They were on the crossroads, and when they were like this with the bicycle, it was safe. When they were with the bicycle, then everybody knew they had to go
All right.
different
interesting.
places.
So it was great risk.
It was an incredible organization.
Right.
It all went well. It was the 22nd of October. More than a month after they all came down, that was 17th of September. It all went well, and they had even to walk through a meadow, and I've been later, I have been with them. On both sides were Germans. They could see the secret lights of the Germans, and they walked 139 hand in hand through this meadow, and then they came to the Rhine. And from Nijmegen, the Allied soldiers were told to shoot certain directions so that the Germans were distracted,
Right.
so they could. And then the American 101, they came from the other side with little boats, and they were all collected, and they all came to the other side. So that was a wonderful experience.
So you were 5 when your country was liberated.
No. Yeah, well, this was in
Later.
44.
Yeah, but after
and
that-
then I was 3, but I did remember
Ah,
better. But I must tell you, Tony Hibbert, he came always back after the war because he was incredible, grateful, and he admired the Dutch
Right.
courage.
Yes.
And he really wanted to do something about this special bond. He said, that's nowhere else in the world. That's only in Arnhem, where Oosterbeek, where this bond is developed. So in 1984,
Yeah.
his plan was to organize a reunion for the 139 escapees.
Yes.
And I had to find the Dutch who helped. It was an incredible. We had
Oh, what an
500 people.
achievement.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we did it every year again
Yes.
and again and again. And it, of course there were less people, but for him, resistant people, Dutch people, number one. And then the veterans and the ambassadors and
you've devoted so many years now to
Yeah.
supporting World War II
yeah,
veterans.
yeah, that's almost
And you have this, you proudly
for
wear
that.
your...
Next year there'll be
Yeah.
40 years I'm involved
Wonderful.
in organizing.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Okay,
Mildred. Thank
yeah.
you for telling your story.
Okay.
So your mother was named the Angel of Arnhem.
Yes.
So tell us the story.
Well, she was not an angel. Although we loved each other very much. The story, yeah, well, Dr. Randall Martin rang the bell Sunday afternoon, the 17th, and we had been at the table. I remember the English coming, we saw them overhead, and Martin called, could I look after some casualties? Yes, 5 casualties in the kitchen, of course.
Yeah.
And on
5 would be okay.
on Tuesday we had 300 wounded in the house.
Wow.
Yeah, and we were all in the cellar. Everybody in Oosterbeek was in the cellar, I know. But my mother went up every time to talk and speak with the wounded.
So many of them didn't survive. And she gave them comfort,
Yeah,
fed them, sheltered.
58 of them didn't survive, and they were laid around the house because it was too dangerous to.
Oh, right.
Yes,
Right.
the guns were 2
Right.
guns in the house, around in the garden.
Yeah.
And the German snipers, they would shoot you in the back
And British soldiers would never do that. I can always cry about it. I think it's incredible, actually. So they were laid around the house, and later after the battle, when my father came, he was hidden in Volvese, somewhere else with friends, under the floor. And he was laying there and he heard the German boots, doink, 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 doink. The rug was taken up, the floor was opened, 2 German soldiers with flashlight. And my father was there, and Cas Oorthuizen, photographer. Die zien wel donker aus, sind wel Italiener. They look very dark, they will be Italian. And they closed the floor, everything, and went.
Wow.
So there are, well, I have more stories about very friendly and feeling sorry Germans.
Yeah.
But the end of my story is that I have now a German grandson.
Oh, right.
Niels,
Circle is complete.
Niels de Horst.
Right.
And he's living in Berlin, and he's 13, and he's a very nice boy.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for telling the story. So we have one more guest to speak to. Thank you.
Well, my name is Lieutenant Elizabeth Schiltmans from the Netherlands. I work for the smallest army unit in the Netherlands. I'm 25% of the unit. Maybe a bit more, but it's just a 4-man, 4-women unit, and we are responsible for the recovery and identification of World War II casualties in the Netherlands. So my unit is called the Recovery and Identification Unit. And that is our daily job. We were established in 1945, just after the war was over in August, and we have recovered and identified approximately 40,000 war casualties since then. And our work continues. And I'm very pleased to hear the stories of the veterans, because these stories need to be told, but also the stories of the people that have not returned home safely to tell their own stories need to be told. And that's what we do for a part of the time. Identifying someone from the Second World War is not easy. It could take years. I think one of the longest cases we've worked on lasted 25 years before we could finally identify someone. But we're still dealing with somebody's daughter, somebody's son, nephew, even brothers and sisters. So their stories need to be told, and that's what we do.
You were talking earlier about a 79-year-old daughter who finally met the father she had never known.
Yes, I was able to identify her father 3 years ago, and she, even though she had a lovely stepfather who loved her very much, she never knew her father because he died shortly after she was born. She never knew him, and by chance, more or less, she gave her DNA to a DNA database for missing persons, and I researched a set of unknown remains, and it turned out to be her father. And then 77 years after the fact, we are standing there in COVID times where you cannot go anywhere. It's just the two of us standing at her father's grave. And I can tell you that is a special moment, very special.
Is that why you do it, for those moments?
I mean, the Dutch government considers it a debt of honor and duty of care, and I feel the same way. I feel privileged to be able to do this, because like I said, these stories need to be told.
And there are unknown numbers of people out there that haven't been repatriated, they haven't been retrieved.
Yeah, we have approximately about 5,000 to 6,000 still missing on Dutch soil and in Dutch waters. We have about 450 plane wreckages still in Dutch soil and Dutch water. And we recover 2 to 3 airplane wreckages every year with crew. And every now and then when the set of remains is found in the Netherlands, then we go to the scene and we recover the remains and start our identification process, which can take years. But you know, we go the extra mile. And if it means that we have to go to Leeds in 2013 to exhume a boy's mother's remains. She died in 1954, but she was the only relative that we could find because he had no registered father. We took her DNA and matched it to the DNA of her son that we had in our laboratory in the Netherlands. And her headstone read, "In loving memory of my son, Donald Stabler Noble, died at Arnhem, age 22. And she never knows, she will never know, but she never knew that she was the one who identified her own son.
Wow. Oh, that's a wonderful story. Thank you so much, Els. That's wonderful.